What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. If you guys want to support the channel, you can click on that whatnot link in the description down below. You'll get a free $15 whenever you sign up and you'll be supporting the channel. Additionally, you can become a patron. Special shout out to my high contributing patrons, Newsome and Irrelevant. You guys rock. Now let's get into today's Deck Tech with Edward Kenway. And I know I'm a little bit late on this guy, but hey, it's better late than never, right? Now this guy has a lot going on for him. He has a way to ramp us consistently in the command zone, and then additionally he gives us card advantage in the command zone in the form of our opponent's decks, right? So this deck is going to focus on getting vehicles and pirates on the battlefield, and then we're going to tap our pirates down using the crew ability, and then we're going to attack people with our giant vehicles. This is going to allow us to ramp a ton, get card advantage, and at the end of the day, it's going to throw a ton of artifacts on the battlefield. So I thought we could kind of lean into an artifact affinity route, not too much, just like as a little sub theme. That way we can play these equipment right here and make our pirates massive. Additionally, they are outlaws, so we get to abuse stuff like Laughing Jesper Flint, and it's just going to be a fun deck that generates a ton of mana, smashes face with vehicles and pirates, and hopefully leads to the win. If that sounds like a deck tech you want to get into, let's get into it. Alright, we're going to kick off this deck tech a little bit differently. We're going to go over the win con, then we're going to talk about the pirates, we're going to move on to the vehicles, and finally we will end it off with some really synergistic cards that complement the commander and break this strategy. Kicking it off with the win cons, we have Marionette Master in the deck. Now this deck generates an ungodly amount of treasure tokens, and now we can sacrifice those treasure tokens to deal direct damage to our opponent's face. Now if we do equip Marionette Master with something like a cranial plating, nettle cyst, or even a cranial ram, that is going to end the game very quickly with any meaningful board state, as long as we can generate a solid amount of treasure tokens. There is also a pseudo infinite combo in the deck with Glinthorn Buccaneer and Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator. Now, usually effects like Malcolm only trigger off of combat damage, but pirates kind of cheat that and they say, hey, as long as a pirate's dealing damage, we're going to get this effect. So whenever Glinthorn Buccaneer triggers his ability, whenever you discard a card, Glinthorn Buccaneer deals 1 damage to each opponent, that's actually going to deal 3 damage, right? 1 to each opponent, and then we're going to get 3 treasure tokens off of Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator. That's going to allow us to activate Glinthorn Buccaneer's ability again because we generated 3 treasure tokens. Now we can kind of do this until our opponents are just dead, and that's going to win us the game. To set this combo up to make sure it succeeds, you really want all 3 of your opponents around the same life total because it gets kind of wonky towards the end and you kill some of your opponents. Then we're going to run Cyberdrive Awakener. This card has insane synergy in this deck because this can animate all of our vehicles, and then additionally it can animate all of our treasure tokens. So as long as we have a decent board state and some treasure tokens on the battlefield, this can kill a couple opponents, if not all of our opponents, and win us the game. Not to mention the fact that all of our vehicles are now animated means that we can attack with all of our pirates as well, because now we don't have to tap them to crew our vehicles. Last but not least, our commander is kind of a win con in the command zone. This guy just generates a ton of value, gives us card advantage in the form of stealing our opponent's deck, so in the right scenario where we get a meaningful board state, we will literally just outvalue our opponents while beating them to death with pirates and vehicles. I'd also like to point out a really funny win con using something like Port Razor, the Reaver Cleaver, and any of the 3 Nettle Cyst effects. This just generates a massive creature in near infinite mana, right? Because Port Razor is going to give us a ton of additional combat steps, and every time he connects with the Reaver Cleaver and Nettle Cyst attached to him, he's going to get bigger and generate even more treasure tokens for our next combat step. By the time we get to our last opponent, that guy's gonna be dead, and then we're gonna have over 100 treasure tokens very easily. Moving on to our other pirates in the deck that we haven't already gone over, we have Don Andreas. This guy was built for this deck since our commander allows us to cast our opponent's cards because we're attacking them with a ton of vehicles. Additionally, there's a lot of other cards in this deck that can utilize our opponent's decks, so he's just going to benefit off of that as well. Admiral Brass and Admiral Bucket Brass are both going to see play in this deck. I love Admiral Brass here because honestly, the fact that she's allowed to just put it onto play and we don't have to cast it is massive, especially when they're trying to get rid of something like a Port Razor. We can just put it right back onto the battlefield and it gains haste, so that's very notable here. Admiral Bucket Brass is definitely worse, but it's a solid anthem and does just add to the theme of stealing our opponent's permanents. Francisco is also also amazing, especially with, again, Glinthorn Buccaneer, because you can explore with Francisco up to 3 times. This deck can fill the graveyard very efficiently and really dig through the library to find the cards you need at any given point, and that's just going to add to its power and flexibility. Ramirez, also amazing here. He looks like he's 4 mana, but he's actually 2 mana because we cast him and then immediately get 2 treasure tokens. And then his second ability is just busted. Whenever one or more pirates you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library. You may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. Yes, you don't have to cast it, and that's just going to add to the synergies we have in the deck, especially Don Andreas. Notably, this is worded like professional facebreaker, so this means we can trigger him up to 3 times a turn as long as we deal combat damage to each of our opponents with a pirate. Gem Cutter Buccaneer is going to be amazing in this deck. It's just going to give us a tap treasure token whenever a pirate enters the battlefield, and then additionally, pirates can kind of be easy to block. I mean, a lot of them have flying or menace, but honestly, as long as they have 2 creatures, it's easy to chump a pirate. They're not that big. This is going to solve that problem and make them harder to block for our opponents, and can result in some lethal damage if we have the right cards on the battlefield. Notably, that's why we did lean so hard into the vehicles, because pirates aren't massive, so now whenever we don't have very big pirates on the battlefield, we can still tap them for value with our commander. Breaches the Blastmaker. This is the first out of 3 times you're going to see Breaches in this deck. This guy's kind of interesting, so I'll explain it. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, you may sacrifice an artifact. We have a ton of treasures to do that with, and then if you do, flip a coin. When you win the flip, copy the spell. Good for us, right? And then if you lose the flip, Breaches can deal damage equal to that spell's CMC to any target. So both of them are upsides. Sometimes you even want to lose the coin flip to take out one of our opponent's key pieces. Captain Storm, another crazy card with the Reaver Cleaver. Whenever it deals combat damage, we're going to get those treasure tokens. Those treasure tokens enter the battlefield, and then we're going to put a 1/1 counter on her for each artifact that entered the battlefield, right? So again, Reaver Cleaver with extra combats and Captain Storm, kind of insane, and then it's just insane on its own. She's going to get massive in this deck. Even with our commander and a couple pirates, this girl just gets big very quickly. Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, this is just an amazing card to see in your opening hand. He's going to come to the battlefield very early, he's going to be able to consistently deal combat damage to our opponents, and then late game we're going to get 4 counters on him and be able to cast something for free. Very consistent value, especially with that loot effect. Coercive Recruiter, amazing. Every time a pirate enters the battlefield, we get to steal one of our opponent's creatures for a turn and turn it into a pirate. Again, making it really hard for our opponents to block us when they don't have any creatures because we stole them all. Dire Fleet Ravager, I've always wanted to put this in a deck. Seemed like a perfect deck to put it in, and it's just going to really speed up the clock on the game because he just makes everybody lose a third of their life. Breaches Eager Pillager and Breaches Brazen Plunderer, amazing cards in this deck. Again, one of these Breaches is going to synergize again amazingly with Don Andreas and just stealing our opponent's cards overall, and then the other one's going to give us some very good utility. This guy prevents blocks, creates treasure tokens, and can be card advantage. He kind of just does everything we want to do in this deck. Stormfleet Negotiator kind of reads like a group hug card, but it's going to be way better for us. What's going to happen is everybody reveals the top card of their library, and then we create a map token for each non-land card revealed this way. Then everybody's going to get to draw a card. Now, this might look group huggy, but again, just having the ability or the possibility to generate upwards to 4 artifacts every single turn is massive in this deck. Remember, we're running a ton of cards that care about us sacrificing artifacts, using artifacts for fodder, or just having artifacts on the battlefield. So this girl's going to put in some amazing work. Aidwell is amazing here as well. He enters the battlefield, we're going to dig 6 cards deep, and then we put a pirate or vehicle from those 6 cards into our hand. Not to mention, whenever we deal combat damage with a vehicle, we can return this guy from our graveyard to our hand. So that's going to give us his ETB again, and it's going to trigger all of our other cards that care about a pirate entering the battlefield. Broadside Bombarders, this is very good here. We're just using this to sacrifice our treasure tokens, or again our map tokens, to deal damage to our opponent's key pieces and take them off the board. Pirated Copy just copies the best creature card on the battlefield, turns it into a pirate, and then it draws us a card whenever it deals combat damage. Siren Storm Tamer, Kite Cell Larcenist, and Hostage Taker are amazing cards here, just solid removal that fit the theme of the deck. Amphin Mutineer, again, amazing removal card, and it fits the theme of the deck. Laughing Jesper Flint, this guy's not a pirate, but all of our pirates are mercenaries. So whenever I saw something like Don Andreas in this deck and the overall potential to generate a ton of treasure tokens, Laughing Jesper Flint just seemed like a no-brainer. Now we're exiling a ton of cards from our opponent's deck, we get to cast all of those cards, and our commander is feeding us the treasure tokens to cast those cards. It just seems like a perfect card to put in the deck here. Black Market Connections was too good not to include. It generates us treasure tokens, card advantage, and makes us one pirate per turn. That's exactly what this deck wants to do. Before we move on to the vehicles, I want to talk about the main strategy of this deck and what this deck is trying to do. You want to get an early vehicle on the battlefield and then get some pirates on the battlefield as well. Work up to your commander, cast your commander, and then you want to be crewing those vehicles with your pirates to trigger your commander not attacking, right? Whenever we go to combat, if we lose our pirates, we're generating less treasure tokens each turn, and we're not triggering our commanders to steal our opponent's deck. Now, late game, we can use the pirates in conjunction with our vehicles to kill some opponents because we can start dealing some massive damage. But again, early game, it's really important to have a vehicle, a couple pirates, and your commander on the battlefield. So keep that in mind when we're going over the vehicles I included in this deck. Jackdaw. Now, whenever you deal combat damage with this vehicle, you get to discard your entire hand and then draw cards equal to the amount of artifacts you control. This card's absolutely insane in this deck because we kind of care about having some of our creatures in our graveyard, and then additionally we have a lot of cards we're going to talk about later that reanimate artifacts and creatures from our graveyard, so we're not really losing out on anything by pitching some of them to the yard, and then we're going to draw upwards to 20 cards sometimes depending on how many artifacts we have on the battlefield. Adrestia kind of seems like a weird include, but honestly it comes down early and it can kind of draw us 2 cards with our commander, right? Because if we crew it with our commander, we're going to draw a card because an assassin crewed it, and then additionally if we deal combat damage, and this does have island walked, so it's kind of hard to block for our blue players out there, we're going to exile the top card of their library, so you kind of get 2 cards a turn for this, and it comes down early, so it's exactly what we want here. The Indomitable, perfect. There's a lot of ways, or just incidental ways, to discard cards in this deck, so the fact that we can cast this from our graveyard if we control a pirate is very useful, and then it's just going to be solid card advantage on top of that, along with being a 6/6 body. Kind of insane. I'm a big fan of the Belligerent as well. It's a 5/5 body, and then whenever we attack, we get to generate a treasure token and then cast cards from the top of our library for the rest of the turn. And remember, whenever you're casting a card from the top of your library, you are also drawing that card. So this is card advantage. Magmatic Galleon, this is another way to generate treasure tokens, and additionally, it's kind of removal. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to bolt something for 5 damage. So the synergies are just stacking up here. The Titanic's kind of a funny card. It looks kind of out of place, all these ships in the water, and then you randomly got one in space, but it's too good to not include it in this deck. Whenever it deals combat damage, we can sack it to generate 7 treasure tokens. That's going to be absolutely insane for this strategy. Subterranean Schooner comes down early. It allows us to start getting away with our plan of crewing up vehicles with our pirates, and then additionally, the Explorer is kind of useful here, getting more lands in our play or getting dead cards off the top of our library that again we can cast later using our other effects is going to just be very useful here. Smuggler's Copter, yeah, you caught me. I ran out of good pirate ships, but this one's really good here. The ability to just impulse draw whenever it attacks, and it has flying, so a form of evasion. Exactly what this deck wants to do. Comes down early, allows us to start triggering our commander. It's just a super solid card. Reckoner Bankbuster is kind of in the deck for the same reason. This thing comes down early, allows us to start crewing with our pirates, and then additionally, it is a little bit of card advantage and a little bit of ramp. Brotherhood Vertibird, again, really weird in a pirate deck, but amazing in this deck. This thing has power equal to the number of artifacts you control. So again, equip this thing with the Reaver Cleaver and you're off to the races. Just remember, when this does stop being a creature, the Reaver Cleaver is going to automatically unequip from it, but it's still going to be a crazy synergy in this deck and just massive overall. Cultivator's Caravan comes down early, allows us to tap for some mana, and again, start crewing vehicles vehicles with pirates, which is what this deck is trying to do. The Weatherlight allows us to dig deep and find our key pieces. Whenever Weatherlight deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 5 cards of your library. So this is going to allow us to dig for Don Andreas, it allows us to dig for the Reaver Cleaver, any other vehicle we're trying to get on the battlefield, this thing can do that. Mighty Servant of Lueco, I think I said that right. This thing's just going to allow us to deal combat damage and draw upwards to 2 cards a turn while being a 6/6 body. We just have to make sure we're crewing it with at least 2 creatures. Imposter Mech just enters the battlefield as the best creature on our opponent's side of the battlefield, and it's also a vehicle. Remember, you can crew a vehicle as many times as you want per turn. You don't just have to hit that crew limit. So let's say we have 6 pirates on the battlefield and that equals 10 power. We can shove all of them in Imposter Mech. Kind of crazy. Moving on to the really synergistic cards in the deck, we have Hordling Broodlord. There is a plethora of ways to cast spells from exile in this deck, so giving those spells Convoke is extremely powerful, especially when the whole strategy of the deck is tap down all the pirates every single turn. This is just going to add to that strategy, build on it, and make it a lot stronger, especially when it is a tutor on a body as well. Lethal Scheme, again, allows us to tap pirates to destroy creatures. That's exactly what this deck wants to do, and then it's going to give us some impulse draw while we're doing it. Kalane, this guy is just going to make our pirates bigger. As I said earlier in the video, some of these pirates are not very big, so now we can cast them with our treasure tokens, and then whenever we do that, they're going to get a 1/1 counter on them for each treasure token we use to cast them. That's going to make some very massive pirates. Last but not least, we have Chainer and Emery, Lurker of the Lock. These two are going to be our recursion pieces in the deck, or I should say our additional recursion pieces in the deck, because they both do exactly what we need. We can discard a card and then cast them from the graveyard using Chainer. Notably, that does give that card haste, so if we have a Port Raiser and we need that Port Raiser to have haste right away, we can discard it with Chainer's ability and then cast it with Chainer's ability to take our opponents off guard. And then Emery's just going to allow us to cast all of our vehicles or equipment spells from the graveyard. She's very useful here. With that being said, I hope you guys really enjoyed this deck tech. Be sure to leave a comment down below and tell me how you liked the layout of this video. Me going over the win cons and then kind of go into the synergistic pieces instead of mixing it all in the deck somewhere and you having to decipher it. I'd really appreciate some feedback on that. Notably also, would you rather that at the end of the video or the beginning? Let me know. With that being said, I would like to shout out my patrons, Newsome, Irrelevant, Chicken Salad, Excessum, and Preator. You guys are amazing. I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you guys in the next one.